Once upon a time there was a guy. Today we're diving into the story of a young man who's been trying to wake up his hidden powers for years. He's worked so hard, but nothing seems to work. It's like he's stuck in a never-ending dream. But then, something incredible happens. Our hero is transported back in time to an age of heroes. He's given a second chance to make his dreams come true and change a world that's been unfair to him. Let's pick up the story in the year 2020, a year that was a disaster for humanity. A mysterious dimension called a gate opened up, connecting our world to another one. The appearance of this gate caused panic and tension because everyone was worried about the danger it might bring. Governments sent soldiers to investigate, but none of them returned. From the other side of the gate, monstrous creatures started attacking, threatening humanity's existence. But amidst all this chaos, a glimmer of hope emerged. Some lucky individuals received special gifts from powerful beings known as sponsors. These gifted individuals were called hunters, and they possessed incredible powers. Thanks to the Enter, humanity had a fighting chance against the monsters, and extinction wasn't imminent. Among the many Enter, there was one who stood out, the Demon King. Unlike other Enter who relied on their sponsors, the Demon King had the unique ability to grow stronger through his own efforts. His power was so immense that it scared the 12 self-proclaimed gods who ruled this world. In a desperate move, they erased the Demon King from existence and created a place called Eden, where they appointed the Enter as the new rulers of humanity. Those who couldn't become hunters were cast aside as slaves, and life continued under the rule of the Enter. It was a harsh world where those who hadn't awakened their powers were treated like garbage. Now let's focus on our protagonist, Lee Junyoung. He's been training tirelessly with his teacher, Seonggu. Despite a year of effort, Lee Junyoung still hasn't awakened his powers. He knows the odds are against him, but he refuses to give up. He believes that with enough dedication he can catch the attention of a sponsor and finally awaken. Yet, as the days pass, doubt gnaws at him, and he wonders if all his hard work is in vain. Lee Junyoung wanted to give up, but Seonggu immediately stopped him, reminding him of his promise to become a hunter and change the system of discrimination. Seonggu guaranteed that Lee Junyoung could become a hunter someday, and told him to always carry the books left by his parents. Those books were crucial, containing the autobiography of the Demon King. Even though Lee Junyoung couldn't understand the book, he carried it everywhere as per his teacher's order. During their conversation, there was a sudden attack from above. Thankfully, Seonggu's trained instincts saved Lee Junyoung. The attacker turned out to be a woman named Athena, an Eden member and one of the 12 gods. Lee Junyoung was astonished and wondered why Athena, of all people, had come to attack him. Before we continue, take a moment to answer the question of the day. What manhwa is the most crazy and out of this world? Comment down below for a chance to be shouted out. Now back to the recap. Athena's reason for being there was to find the Demon King's autobiography. Her strength was terrifying and it made Lee Junyoung feel helpless. Athena assumed that Seonggu had the book, but sensed a trace of magic from Lee Junyoung. Suspicious, she demanded that he hand over the hidden items. Athena was furious that a mere human had read the book and decided to kill Lee Junyoung as punishment. Just as Athena was about to attack, Seonggu intervened and stopped her. Lee Junyoung was left in awe, wondering who Seonggu was and how he could overpower Athena, one of the 12 gods. Seonggu asked Lee Junyoung seriously if he believed he could change the world system with great power. At first, Lee Junyoung doubted it, given Eden's power, but his teacher's gaze gave him confidence and he promised to keep that pledge. Seonggu smiled and with a swift strike of his sword, killed Lee Junyoung. As Lee Junyoung faced imminent death, Seonggu told him to be nice if they were to meet again. Those words echoed in Lee Junyoung's mind as he entered a room filled with a yellow and white light. Suddenly he found himself in a mysterious place, utterly unfamiliar. When he feels his body, Lee Junyoung senses that he's become stronger. This means he's awakened as a hunter. As he looks around, he realizes he's inside a gate, just as he thought. Before long, he encounters a goblin. Lee Junyoung gets scared at first, but he remembers Seonggu's advice and decides to attack. Surprisingly, his punch alone kills the goblin. Lee Junyoung can't believe how strong he's become. After his first successful goblin kill, a system pop-up appears, saying that the Sky of Apocalypse is watching him. This reminds him of the Demon King, but his fun is cut short when a horde of goblins, including a goblin chieftain, shows up. Lee Junyoung is terrified, but he won't give up. He fights back, even though the chieftain is as tough as an A-rank sea hunter. Lee Junyoung doesn't back down. As he defeats several goblins, he levels up. In the heat of battle, the Sky of Apocalypse supports him by giving him a staff with firepower. Lee Junyoung uses it to stab the goblin chieftain and levels up again. CH4. He's exhausted, and the next thing he knows, he's in a hospital. A nurse tells him he's lucky to be saved by a guild. It's the year 2022. Lee Junyoung is shocked and confused. He didn't expect to be thrown back in time. He wonders where he is and what's going on. The nurse explains that many special hunters have risen to fame, and this year is known as the Year of Heroes. Lee Junyoung realizes this is the perfect time to change the discrimination system. To do that, he needs to get stronger and heal first. Later that afternoon, someone comes to meet him. That man was a member of the association named Kim. Kim's arrival here is to ask who he is and why he entered the gate alone. Of course, the reason why Kim was interested in him was because after looking for information about Lee Junyoung, none of the data matched. Lee Junyoung said that suddenly he could be there. He did not explain that he was thrown into the past, and only testified that he only remembered when he woke up there and did not remember anything about his past. Hearing this makes Kim interested, and they will meet another day. After Kim left, Lee Junyoung checked his status, and unexpectedly, his status was the same as Demon King, namely player. Seeing this, Lee Junyoung was very happy because with this, his plan could be achieved. After several days in the hospital, finally, Lee Junyoung was allowed to go home. Then, after walking around, Lee Junyoung didn't expect to be in the Age of Heroes and in the center of the city where the Storm Hunters gathered. Shortly after that, he was approached by Kim and invited him to the association. Kim would provide a place to live there and create a new identity for him. Kim also congratulated Lee Junyoung for becoming a hunter, one of the special hunters who succeeded in occupying Hunter Rank C in his awakening. People like John would likely get special treatment from the association, considering that people who are born like Lee Junyoung will definitely become strong hunters in the future. After arriving there, Lee Junyoung was surprised, because he was given a good place to live in some qualified facilities. Besides that, Kim also said that there was someone who wanted to meet Lee Junyoung. Finding this, Lee Junyoung was shocked and asked who was someone who knew him. When he met this person, he was the guildmaster of the League Guild, named Xionggu. Seeing this, Lee Junyoung couldn't believe he could meet his teacher. Here, Lee Junyoung just remembered what his teacher said in the future, before he was thrown into the past. When concluding this, Lee Junyoung thought that this was made by Xionggu, and of course the reason Xionggu sent him to the past asked him to keep his promise to change the world system for the better and for peace. Now, because Lee Junyoung couldn't explain all of this here, he immediately had a deep sense of gratitude for Xionggu for saving him. The next day, after resting, John was told to go and follow the Novice Hunter tutorial. This activity is made to find talented young hunters who can be recruited by the association to help bring this world to peace. The trainer who will oversee this tutorial is a B-rank hunter named Bai Sang-soo. It can be seen that the hunters are very enthusiastic about the activities this time because if they pass, they can easily enter the main guilds in this country before doing the tutorial. Sang-soo asked several hunters about the sponsor's purpose in granting great power to them. However, the hunters couldn't answer because the sponsor's intentions remained a mystery and there was no established nation yet. At that moment, Lee Junyoung shared his thoughts, suggesting that sponsors might provide power for entertainment, similar to how characters grow in a game world. Lee Junyoung's insight came after witnessing the Demon King's struggle. Soon, the tutorial began, a straightforward exercise where hunters would face prepared goblins one by one. This worried many hunters, as they couldn't imagine taking on the goblins alone. Sang-soo reassured them, explaining that the goblins were under some form of control and couldn't harm humans. He promised to intervene if anything unexpected occurred. The official tutorial commenced, with some hunters succeeding while others failed. Now it was Lee Junyoung's turn, and the goblin he faced was no ordinary one, it was an orc. This surprised everyone as they couldn't fathom how a novice hunter could defeat such a formidable monster. Sang-soo questioned why Lee Junyoung had to confront a rank-level goblin considering his novice status. However, they remembered that Lee Junyoung had previously defeated a dungeon boss on his own, showcasing his exceptional strength. As the duel began, Lee Junyoung attacked the orc with his spear. His spear managed to pierce the orc's arm, but to everyone's amazement it had no effect. The orc retaliated, and it seemed like Lee Junyoung was in trouble. However, Lee Junyoung displayed remarkable agility, avoiding the orc's attacks and eventually overpowering it. Witnessing this feat left everyone in disbelief. They couldn't fathom how a novice hunter had a sea-level orc. Lee Junyoung's strength was so great that his spear weapon shattered due to the immense force. In the afternoon, Lee Junyoung was visited by Xionggu and Kim. The association party pointed to Kim as an assistant from Legion. Xionggu offered Lee a chance to join the Legion Guild, but Lee Junyoung declined the offer, not out of arrogance, but because it would disrupt his plans. He couldn't afford to get too close to Xionggu or others, as it would complicate his future plans. Lee Junyoung's refusal didn't upset Xionggu. Instead, Xionggu appreciated his honesty and offered assistance whenever Lee Junyoung needed it. The story continued with Lee Junyoung and Xionggu discussing various matters. Xionggu expressed his willingness to help, even though they had just met, as their bond felt as strong as that of brothers. The next day, Lee Junyoung attended the tutorial pass exam, which was happening today. The exam was going to take place inside the gate, but beginners didn't need to worry. As a rank B hunter, they would guide everyone together. Without any delay, they started the trial by entering the gate. Inside, they were surprised by the unusual humidity caused by the high magic density in the game. Their leader led the beginners down the path, and when they encountered goblin monsters, the chief gave them careful instructions. He warned the rookies not to be careless and to attack with caution. Then it was Lee Junyoung's turn to receive attack instructions. With lightning speed and a spear in hand, he swiftly split a goblin in two with a single move. His speed and skill left all the beginners in awe, and the chief couldn't help but think that Lee Junyoung's strength was close to a B rank. After this trial, the chief had every intention of recruiting him. Finally, they reached the boss dungeon area. The chief asked all the beginners to prepare potions and all their equipment to face the dungeon boss at their full strength. Meanwhile, Lee Junyoung pondered the Demon King, who had player-like abilities. Even before they could test that power, the 12 heroes had defeated the Demon King. But if the Demon King grew stronger than them, such an incident might not happen again. Lee Junyoung was determined to use all his knowledge to become strong and potentially change the course of events. As they entered the boss dungeon area, everyone was surprised by the increase in the level of difficulty. They felt a little worried about what kind of boss they would be facing. Then, the chief instructed all the newbies to get out of the way. From the front, a massive fire magic attack loomed, ready to strike them. Of course, the chief couldn't avoid it, so he tried to block the fire magic with his Viper's Fang skill. Even though the chief managed to block the attack, a few flames sneaked past him, surprising everyone. Lee Junyoung quickly stepped in to stop the remaining flames. All the beginners were safe now. Then, a message popped up from a sponsor named Sky of Apocalypse. They asked Lee Junyoung to take on the Goblin Archmage boss in the dungeon. This goblin was special because it had long-range fire magic. Lee Junyoung was the only one who could face it. Different from the rest, he received a challenge from the sponsor. He immediately requested the leader to give him this boss, since it was his wish. The chief couldn't say no to an assassination mission. Lee Junyoung stayed alert and analyzed his opponent's moves. Suddenly, 3 high-level fire magic attacks came from the front, but Lee Junyoung smiled as he raised his shield. Surprisingly, the fire was absorbed into his body. Finding a gap, Lee Junyoung charged forward but was blocked by a barrier. Even though he couldn't advance, Lee Junyoung had another trick up his sleeve to take on the huge flame. He raised his spear and said, "Split!" Instantly, a fiery aura on his spear split the goblin barricade. John charged forward at breakneck speed and with his fiery spear stabbed the Archmage until it was defeated. Mission accomplished. The sponsor was impressed with Lee Junyoung's performance, thanks to the support from the Sky of Apocalypse. After the exam ended, Lee Junyoung's accomplishments were reported to the association's chairman. They saw him as a talented super rookie with great potential, perfect for the chairman's plans. Meanwhile, as Lee Junyoung left the building, he was approached by Kim and Xionggu. Xionggu asked if any guild had recruited him. Lee Junyoung replied that he had been recruited by the chief during yesterday's examination but had turned it down. The reason he avoided joining any guild was that he wanted to keep his identity hidden from someone in the association. Then, instead of thinking about that, Xionggun treated Lee Junyoung to dinner for his first success. After returning from the party, Lee Junyoung analyzed his strength by opening the start menu. It showed that Lee Junyoung's level had already reached level 11, and he had the opportunity to summon an avatar. Not many normal hunters could summon avatars, and even among the 12 heroes, only a few could do it. Curious, Lee Junyoung decided to summon his avatar. A blue aura enveloped his body, but we still don't know what Lee Junyoung's avatar looks like. Furthermore, Lee Junyoung was surprised when Miss Kim reported that he had made the headlines. However, his identity wasn't revealed. Nonetheless, Lee Junyoung immediately made a request to Kim. He wanted a dungeon prepared for him the next day. Lee Junyoung wasted no time and cleared the dungeon, even though he was alone. Monsters like goblins turned out to be quite easy to defeat. Surprisingly, in just the past few days, he had completed 4 dungeons in one go. The Sky of Apocalypse was pleased with his performance. It was no wonder, given his hard work, that Lee Junyoung leveled up. And this is where we finally learn about the avatar that Lee Junyoung had summoned earlier. It's a skull bracelet. Initially, Lee Junyoung thought its effect was to devour monster souls, but it seemed to have no effect after defeating monsters in the dungeon. Lee Junyoung asked Kim about the next dungeon, and Kim explained that all the dungeons had been rented by a guild called the North Army, which had become quite famous recently. Rumor had it that the North Army had rented up to 20 dungeons for training. Lee Junyoung inquired if the guildmaster of the North Guild was Choi Yong-sun, and Kim confirmed that it was indeed him. Before Lee Junyoung arrived, Choi had been a super rookie, but now he had formed a strong guild. This revelation left Lee Junyoung shocked, because he knew that Choi would become famous as one of the 12 heroes in the future. Choi was even nicknamed War King Gunther. In the future, Choi is a really bad person. He's willing to harm many people for his own gain. The worst thing he did was destroy half of Lee Junyoung's village. The next day, while on the road, Lee Junyoung came across two intimidating hunters and traders. He didn't want any trouble, but the delinquent guy blamed everything on him. They got into a fight, and it quickly got intense. Lee Junyoung managed to stop the first guy by throwing him backward. Then the other person pulled out a weapon that should have been banned. Lee Junyoung had had enough, so he punched the guy so hard that he passed out. Lee Junyoung asked Kim to take these two troublemakers to the association. Kim explained that they were from the Guild North Army, which meant they might retaliate. Exactly 2 days later, Lee Junyoung was called to the association. He was accused of attacking a merchant. This was because the merchant had given a statement to the association. Lee Junyoung was confused about what the middle-aged man was up to, but he stayed calm to avoid being mistaken as the culprit. During the debate at the association, things got really tense, but Lee Junyoung finally presented evidence of the actual incident, a recording he had made before going to the old man. He knew from past experiences that facts could get twisted, so he made it a habit to record everything as proof, and that's how the problem was finally resolved. Later, in front of the building, Kim and Sun-gu were already waiting for him. It wasn't long after that, a middle-aged man approached Lee Junyoung and apologized for his earlier statement. He explained that he did it because his son had been threatened by the North Army, and he had to do it to keep his son safe. Guildmaster Lee Seong-gu took responsibility for the man's son's safety. In front of Choi, his manly side emerged as he shook hands with Seong-gu, overwhelmed with emotion. Seong-gu warned Choi that if he ever bothered Lee Junyoung again, he would be his opponent. The next day, Kim received news that the North Army had resolved yesterday's problem by paying only a fine. Lee Junyoung already knew this, but he found it strange because the North Army was known for being cold and ruthless. Lee Junyoung asked Kim to keep an eye on them for any new information. The following day, in order to become stronger, Lee Junyoung asked Seong-gu to join him in a raid. He wanted to learn from Seong-gu, who had a lot of experience. Meanwhile, in the North Army's residence, Choi's younger brother Yong-soo was furious that Choi hadn't taken any action. On the other hand, a man in armor urged them to calm down and resolve their internal problems first. Going back to the raid with Lee Junyoung and Seong-gu's group, it was clear that Seong-gu's group was powerful and had a solid strategy. But what stood out the most was Seong-gu himself. His sword was covered in an aura, and he could defeat 5 monsters with a single slash. After showcasing his strength, Seong-gu encouraged Lee Junyoung to do the same. With determined eyes, Lee Junyoung moved forward, his spear glowing with a blue aura. He aimed it at the goblins surrounding them, ready to show his strength. Before we continue, let's take a moment to shout out Kaylee Charles 8182, who commented, "Nice vid man," on our Dungeon Athlete video. Thanks for commenting. In an instant, he could annihilate everything. It happened so suddenly that all the hunters watching were left astonished. They wondered how Lee Junyoung could possess such incredible power without casting any spells. Seong-gu explained to them that it wasn't a skill but an authority. After clearing the dungeon, Seong-gu made another offer to Lee Junyoung. He wanted him to join his guild, and in return, Seong-gu would make him the deputy guildmaster. But Lee Junyoung, just like before, declined the offer without revealing his reasons. Shortly after, a notification popped up on a cell phone. It stated that the Hunter Association needed 100 hunters to clear a gate. This message came from the North Army. Lee Junyoung and Seong-gu sensed it was a trap, but Lee Junyoung seemed increasingly interested in joining the mission. Meanwhile, In Chang was quite annoyed with the mission because he had no idea what the guildmaster was up to. Unexpectedly, his 2 childhood friends, Choi and Yong-soo, had changed their attitudes and were now only interested in gaining the highest positions. In Chang felt helpless as he couldn't save them from this path. In Chang received a call from Lee Junyoung, who was worried about him. In Chang agreed to meet at a designated location. When they met, In Chang immediately warned Li Junyoung to back out of the mission, as it was a trap set by Choi. Li Junyoung, always resourceful, gathered information from In Chang. He even insulted the North Army Guild by calling it a chaos guild, sponsored by evil beings. In Chang was furious and released a powerful killing aura, but Li Junyoung managed to calm the situation by suggesting that the North Army Guild could change. Returning to the guild, In Chang couldn't help but wonder who Li Junyoung really was. Meanwhile, Li Junyoung believed that he could persuade In Chang to join his side, as he saw potential in him. In Chang was known as a famous hunter, rumored to have defeated the Avatar Demon King and other formidable monsters. However, he was ultimately killed by Choi Yong-soo. The problem was that while In Chang was incredibly strong, his resolve was weak. The North Army Guild's future relied on In Chang's balance within the guild. Recognizing this, Li Junyoung started training diligently to strengthen his body and skills. After slaying numerous dungeon monsters, his spear was damaged, leading him to visit the most renowned blacksmith's workshop in the area. However, at this moment, the Redhead Forge had only a small business. This man's name is Park Ye-hun. In the Demon King's book, he said that if Park Ye-hun helped the Demon King to the end, then history will definitely change. At first, when someone came here, Park felt strange about Li Junyoung's arrival. But after Li Junyoung explained that he was sponsored to come here, Park had no doubts about him. The problem was that Park couldn't make his equipment because he wasn't satisfied with the fire in this place. However, Li Junyoung promised to help him overcome the fire with his magic. Park was very surprised because Li Junyoung's fire magic was high level. A week later, Park finally succeeded in making a very good and deadly weapon, a spear that could be strengthened with fire magic. The greater the fire it received, the stronger the spear would become. The story continued with Li Junyoung in the dungeon. He was trying to get the power out of his skull bracelet, but he hadn't received any clues about it yet. Even if he only had In Chang on his side, Li's chance of winning would increase. 2 weeks before the gate deployment, Li Junyoung was working hard to increase his level with the new spear. His strength was much different from before, evident in his battles against monsters in the dungeon. The bad thing was that there was very little time to reach the targeted level, and John hadn't been able to rest in these 2 weeks. The next day, Choi instructed all members to get everything ready. After today, the North Army would become the strongest guild in the world. In Chang was very surprised by Choi's current aura, wondering how his level had reached rank A so quickly. Meanwhile, Choi's right-hand man proclaimed that everything was going according to that person's plan. With this motivation, all members were excited to complete the gate. Elsewhere, on the way to the gate, Kim warned Li Junyoung about the North Guild. If he continued to follow the gate, the highest possibility was death. Li Junyoung knew it, but couldn't let that rotten guild mess up again. Here, he would teach the value of a person. Near Li Junyoung, he was surprised to see Xionggu, even though guild leagues weren't allowed in this place. Xionggu warned Li Junyoung to be more careful because Choi was stronger than he imagined. It was clear that Choi had become rank A. Xionggu said he would wait for Li Junyoung to come out, and if not, he would destroy the guild. Li Junyoung was impressed by Xionggu's determination. Shortly after that, the dungeon opened, and 100 hunters would start the extermination mission. Before entering, they were surprised by the level change. The system said that special traits were activated, and the exit was barricaded. To get out, they had to defeat the boss dungeon first. It was said to be a grade, so everyone felt panic and fear. Choi and his 2 subordinates were calm because they were in control of this dungeon. Choi shouted loudly, asking everyone to calm down. He said they should not give up, and by working together, they could get through all of this. Then a notification appeared saying the ruler of the Riverside was trying to dominate Riverside. This was Choi's skill to control the hunters beneath him. Li Junyoung couldn't move and just went with the flow. Choi asked Yong-soo to save his strength because a big wave would occur in the next few hours. Choi would use the hunters under him as a shield. Besides, Choi gave a mission to In Chang to kill Li Junyoung no matter what. The first wave started, and mermen came toward the hunters. They rushed to fight, even though they knew the monsters had high levels. Some hunters died due to the claws and dangerous slashes of the monster. On the other hand, Li Junyoung wanted to help, but he had to save his stamina. Suddenly, the North Army members started attacking the lizards from behind to motivate other hunters to fight to the max. Realizing this, Li Junyoung decided to move too. With his fire spear, he managed to defeat several monsters at once. All the hunters who saw this were truly amazed by the greatness of the young man, discovering who he really was. On the other hand, Inchin was also taken aback because Li Junyoung's progress had been so unexpected. Just 10 days ago, in Chang's mind, Li Junyoung was still the same, but now his level had shot up to rank A. Returning to Li Junyoung's side, With his incredible strength, the first wave finally came to an end without causing many casualties. Although in the first wave Lee Junyoung's stamina was drained quite a bit, somehow his strength improved even more. Better yet, some sponsors started paying attention to Lee Junyoung. But when Lee Junyoung mentioned that he would become a strong hero if he got more sponsors, the Sky of Apocalypse seemed displeased, and all sponsors lost interest. Sometime later, many hunters approached Lee Junyoung and wanted to help him. Of course, this made Choi sick because his plan had been disrupted a little, yet he would instigate everything again. After learning Choi's weakness, Lee Junyoung would attract all the hunters to his side. While doing that, he could also reach level 30. After a tiring battle, they finally reached the 5th wave. Even though 4 hunters had lost their lives, many of the hunters started to feel despair. Lee Junyoung, who had grown tired of Choi's insults, couldn't understand why they weren't taking action despite the humiliation. Choi remained silent, knowing his plan had been ruined, but he was determined to carry it out. As Wave 5 came to an end, a mid-boss dungeon appeared. The monster was a water golem, and its strength would increase, making it invincible if it got into the water. This was a dire situation. How could they possibly defeat it? One of these deadly water beasts could devastate the land. With no other options, the hunters began to attack the golem. The ranged hunters and attackers all tried their best, but their attacks had no effect at all. The only attack that seemed to hurt the monster was Lee Junyoung's spear. Legion explained that to harm these monsters, they needed to coat their weapons with magic. Hearing this, all the hunters started to try it, and, as Lee Junyoung had said, by enchanting their weapons with magic, they could finally begin to harm the water golems. The problem this time is that when you attack the monster, it heals up quickly. That's when Lee Junyoung figured out the water golem's weakness was in its core. So, he waited patiently for the core to show itself. When the right moment came, he hurled his spear with all his might. The spear hit the monster's core, and that's how they defeated the mid-boss dungeon. Lee Junyoung got a water gem as a reward and even leveled up. Some sponsors were pretty impressed with his skills. Other hunters soon realized that this young guy was an A-rank hunter. 2 months ago, he was just a rookie. Choi, who saw this, was not happy at all. He was mad because Lee Junyoung kept getting stronger. Then, Chang came up and asked Choi to give up, making Choi even angrier. He told everyone to step up and become heroes. But when he looked back, Chang was gone, leaving his mask behind. He had quit the North Army Guild. The North Army members started battling the monsters below, and they realized their levels were way behind Lee Junyoung's. He was taking down waves of monsters like crazy, not even worrying about his stamina. His goal was to level up and become even stronger. Suddenly, Lee Junyoung was surprised by a woman who came to help him. Surprisingly, she was wearing the same clothes as Chang. So, behind that iron mask was not a man, but a woman. Lee Junyoung was still suspicious that Chang might be with Choi's group, so he kept his distance. But when In-chang showed her determination to leave the North Army Guild, he finally accepted her. Even though In-chang had helped some hunters and some had even died, she didn't regret her decision. She joined because she was inspired Lee's determination. After a short break, the dungeon boss finally appeared. All the hunters got ready to face it. Surprisingly, this time their opponent was a giant snake. It seemed like Lee Junyoung knew how to defeat this huge monster. He noticed that In-chang looked even stronger when she was cornered. On the other hand, Choi gave a strange order. He wanted to control the dungeon boss. Choi used his power to make it rain in the dungeon, even though Lee Junyoung had the water element. But the rain had no effect. Lee Junyoung decided to go after Choi to corner him. Although Lee Junyoung might be stronger, it was because of the waves that made him even more powerful. What will happen next? Find out next time by staying tuned for our future recaps. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more great recaps.